You're listening to Mission Eve, a podcast that explores the stories of women who are opening the frontier of space to humanity. Your host is Megan Crawford, managing partner of Space Fund, a venture capital firm investing in the space industry. She is a mother, volunteer, founder, and true believer in humanity's future in space. Mission Eve is meant to inspire the girls of today who will be the women of tomorrow, leading our first permanent off-world settlements. Space needs women. Space needs you.
Welcome to Mission Eve. I'm your host, Megan Crawford, and I am very pleased to have as a guest this week, Alana Bartolini. So glad to have you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, so let's start at the beginning. Let's tell your story from the very beginning. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? And do you think that had an impact on your interest in space?
Okay, so I grew up in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And I think, we'll get to how it I think had an impact on me going into space in the first place. But starting off, I think one of the biggest things that was influential in my life growing up was that Toronto is a super multicultural city. So I think about half of immigrants to Canada settle in the GTA, which is the Greater Toronto Area. And I went to school throughout, my K to 12 and undergrad university with people from all different nations, all different religions, all different backgrounds. And I became very accustomed and very used to celebrating this fact. And this is something that I really liked growing up. And it's something that I think I seeked out when I went into a professional world. And so I think ending up in space is kind of a beautiful way to be a peak highlight of that idea, in that I found a community of people who celebrate differences and nationalities, what country you're from. It's not important at all. We are all kind of looking for the same thing. We all want to explore, go beyond, and find ways to make this Earth better. And I think that's essentially how I ended up in the space industry.
That's excellent. Yeah, I love that. So were there any defining moments or influential people in your early life that helped lead you to space or science?
Absolutely. Teachers.
Good.
Hands down. Yeah, I have to say really all of my mentors, my biggest inspirations have been teachers. And that has been, specific teachers when I was really young. I remember I had a teacher in grade 3 who he really helped me pursue my passions. I loved science fiction. I loved J.R.R. Tolkien. Mm-hmm. And as a young child, sometimes the other kids didn't necessarily understand what was going on with my interest there. But he really nurtured that and encouraged me. And I think that helped me to continue going off into interests that I really enjoyed, and not necessarily if they were popular or not. And then later on, when I went into middle school, I had a science teacher that was just fantastic. She was truly wonderful. She was a really inspiring person, and she helped kind of spark my curiosity and interest in more going into biology. And then in high school, I actually went to a performing arts high school. So I majored in dance.
Excellent.
Which had nothing to do with science. I had been dancing since I was young. I was a competitive dancer. And then I went to school for dance. So that was my major. We would do the majors in the morning, and then in the afternoon was academics. And I loved it. And I think it completely had I thank my academic skills almost entirely to dance, actually. I think the training and the way that it shaped my brain had a huge influence in the way that I learn and how I process information, and actually why I chose to go into sciences. And so with that, I had, science teachers in that school that encouraged me in both my arts and in my academics. I eventually chose to go more into the academic route for a professional career. And then throughout university, I had a teacher who she actually used to work at NASA. And she was a huge inspiration in my life, and helping me to see that maybe, my aspirations were not just dreams, that they were something that could be realized. And she helped connect me with networks. She helped write me reference letters. She helped to really spark and make that aspiration a reality. So I attribute all of my achievements really to my teachers.
That's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. So what kind of dance, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I trained. So in competitive dance, I did everything. I was good at most of them, although I did have to participate in some of the other dance styles, which I was not good at. But I mostly trained in ballet and modern. And then in high school, I focused on ballet and modern.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and I still did dance throughout university too. So I did varsity dance throughout my time in university, which kept me extremely busy. But it was it was a wonderful experience, and I still dance today. So
glad to hear that. Yeah, that it hasn't left your life, right? So I played cello all through high school. I haven't picked up a cello since. And I often think, man, I should go buy a cello and take some lessons, because I'm sure I've completely forgotten all the important things. But I'm happy to hear that that the arts have not left your life. So that's wonderful. Did you, when you were young, did you want to be an astronaut? Did you have that kind of space bug as a kid?
I don't think I did, actually. I wanted to be an entertainer. What exactly that meant, I'm not quite sure. Entertainment of any sorts. I just liked entertaining people. I liked having people around, performing arts, and talking. I really like talking as a little kid. So it's funny enough that now I've ended up in a position where I do a lot of presentations, and I get to actually be a teacher myself, which in a way is entertainment. It's a form of performing. Yeah. So that was initially what I wanted. Of course, I had interest in science and engineering from young ages too. I got a microscope when I was, I think, 8. And I was out in the backyard collecting bugs. Yeah. And I remember wanting very desperately to understand what hair and blood looked like. So I flossed my teeth and got some blood. My parents were very confused and concerned, but I mean,
you were a kid. You're learning things.
I was investigating. I was being a scientist.
I love that. That's great. So what did you study in college? When you went to university, what did you study?
So I studied health sciences. I went to a specific program at a university called McMaster University, and I studied a Bachelor of Health Sciences. And this was a very specific program because it was one of the, I believe, the first universities in Canada that used inquiry and problem-based learning at a university level. So, and I don't think even at the time I realized how unique that was until I left school altogether and then started my professional career. And I realized that these learning and teaching styles were things still being discussed about being implemented into education. And I realized, this is what I did in university already. I have personal firsthand experience with this as a learner. And so it meant that instead of course, going to just lectures that were more didactic, so, a lecture at the front, all the students kind of watching, reading slides, we were placed in really kind of extreme group work settings. So I had, one course throughout school where we were given a problem about metabolic disorders. You were assigned one metabolic disorder, and you and your group for the entire year had to work on everything surrounding that. So from diagnosis to possible treatment options to developing maybe an idea for a new treatment option. And every week you would have to present, and every week someone's name would get called out of the hat. So everyone in your group had to be ready to present. And it was a really unique style of learning. And I think it had a huge impact on the way that I processed the information, and then was able later on when I started my career to be able to work with people. I think that is a huge differentiation between getting things done and letting things slide, that you have to be able to interact. You have to be able to collaborate. You have to be able to work with people, because nothing is done alone, right? And so often in school, you're really left on your own. You learn, and then you have to process, you have to memorize, you have to regurgitate, and that's it. You get a score, and that's the end. And then suddenly you make it into the real world, and you're like, oh,
yeah, this is different.
Okay. First of all, even if I wanted to do this by myself, I can't, because it's just too big. And, that realistically, that's not what it is. So I think the learning kind of style that I had throughout university was really interesting, and a unique experience that helped much longer than just during my school time there.
Wonderful, wonderful. So that sounds like it's almost a pre-med degree. Is that what kind of it was meant to be?
Kind of. So actually, yeah. So I would say maybe 80% of the people that I went to undergraduate with went into medical school. Probably more actually than 80%. So it was kind of a pre-med discipline. So it was focused more on anatomy and physiology. And most of the people did go into medical school. I have to admit that was my intention at first, and then I got sidetracked into space.
Okay, well, tell me that story. How did that happen?
So, I mean, really, okay, growing up in Canada, of course, Canada does have a space industry, but it's a little bit of a different focus. So most of the focus is in telecoms and robotics. And I didn't necessarily have an interest in either of those specifically. So I thought, okay, maybe I can't work in space. Maybe that's not, the career path for me. And so I decided to pursue more biology. And I thought, okay, I love this. I'll go into the medical route. And then it just so happened, I mean, this is like how timing in life really works. Just as I was finishing my bachelor's degree, I saw a call for Canadian students to apply for a scholarship to go to NASA for 2.5 months for an internship. And I looked at the projects, and one of the projects was exactly or very similar to what I was doing for my bachelor's thesis. So I was looking at the effects of bones and osteoporosis in patients who needed knee replacements. And they were looking for someone who had kind of this background of understanding bone morphology and physiology, and then kind of translating that into a space context. So how radiation affects bone growth. And I thought, why not? I'll try and apply, I'll give it a shot.
Yeah.
I have nothing to lose. I've always had this interest in space. So I wanted to kind of go into it, but didn't have the opportunity. And then this kind of came up. I applied and I got it, which was, I think I must have ran around my house screaming. All my roommates were like, please don't bother us. We're trying to study. So that kind of took me off in a whole other direction. I then went there for 2.5 months, and then I stayed on and continued to work a little longer. And then I decided to come back to Canada and do my master's degree so that I would have some higher education. And then I decided to go on to Europe afterwards.
So I remember when I got my NASA internship, which I got during my master's, I think I did the exact same thing. I think I just ran around the house screaming. I was just so excited, right? Because you apply for it, you're like, yeah, I'm not going to get it, but I'll apply, right? Yeah. And then, that acceptance just felt so good. So I know that feeling very, very personally, very deeply. I understand completely. So tell me a little bit about your master's. What did you do for your master's?
Sure. So I did my master's degree in medical sciences, and I was looking at some more actual, some behavioral science. It shifted a little, in and out of different things. And so when I went back to do my master's in Canada, I decided to focus. I was working actually at a hospital, which had a huge lab facility in the basement, and they had a 6-axis motion platform, which sounds crazy because, that's not what you find in the basement of a hospital. So you go down and there's this huge thing that, it has different cabs that can be placed on top of this motion platform, all for different things. One that's a winter lab, which it has an ice floor, and they simulate people falling. So they're trying to do research on how to create better shoes for winter.
Right. Okay, yeah.
All of this kind of crazy stuff that you think, oh, this is not usually what you find in a hospital. And so I ended up using one of these cabs that was a car placed fully inside a virtual reality simulation. And then we were trying to look at some risk perception. So how you perceive risk and how it changes based on some different parameters of auditory cueing. So I thought that this would be something that perhaps if I then was going to go back into the space field after I finished my master's, it would be applicable if I wanted to go into some more kind of human robotic interaction kind of domain.
Excellent.
Which is not actually even where I ended up anyways. But, this is...
that's the way it goes,
that's
right?
Part of it.
Yeah. So what did you do after your master's?
So after my master's, and this is actually something that, so throughout both my undergrad, internships, master's, I continued to be placed in these positions, and I would place myself in the positions too, where I did a lot of presentations and a lot of outreach. I loved presenting. I mean, as we said before, my entertainer coming out. So I loved presenting. I loved doing some education stuff. I loved teaching. I loved doing outreach. And I thought after I finished my master's, I love being a scientist, but I was very frustrated by the fact that a lot of the scientists around me couldn't communicate what they were doing. And I thought, it's so important. It's equally as important as the science itself because, realistically, the money that's coming into research is public money. And if people aren't interested in the public and what you're doing and they don't understand how it's affecting their lives, they're not going to want to fund it.
Right.
And I mean, it's the same in space, of course. So I was really passionate, or I am really passionate still, about this kind of science communication and education and educating the public in science literacy. And so when I finished my master's, I applied for a position at the European Space Agency, which was in the education office. And originally the position was to be, taking care of some international education opportunities, which I thought would be a nice fit, and that I liked international interaction. I like talking to people. And then it kind of also shifted that position as well, too, more into a scientific role as well. So now currently the position that I have is a great balance between both hands-on interaction with teachers and students and also being able to have and use some of my scientific background in experiments for the space station.
Oh, that sounds exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, let's take that apart and tell me a little bit about each of those parts of your job.
Sure. So my official title is that I'm the International Space Station and International Education Coordinator, Operations Coordinator. There's a lot of words in that title. Yeah. But really what it means is I have these two kind of facets. So I work in primary and secondary education, which is that we run programs for K to 12, I guess what it is here in the US, but in other countries, primary, secondary. That are based on helping teachers use space as a context for learning. So we understand that, of course, space isn't in every curriculum. And even if it is, it may be a small portion. But of course, space has applicable aspects in all science, technology, engineering, mathematics fields. So you can use the fact that those items are in the curriculum to bring space into the classroom. And of course, it's a really engaging subject. Right. Kids love space.
Right. That's pretty universal, I found.
So,
yeah.
If you need to learn Newton's laws, why not use space as the context and example for doing that activity in your classroom? So we develop different types of programs and activities for teachers to use in the classroom in hands-on activities. And then the other side of that is that I do the coordination for our ISS activities for education for Europe, which facilitate those programs. So, for example, we have one program which is about learning how to code in Python on a Raspberry Pi computer. And so we certified 2 Pis for the space station, and then we have the hands-on activities in the classrooms where kids can learn how to code. And if they meet the requirements, then their code is uploaded to the space station. We run it on the ISS and the kids get a certificate back saying, my code has run on the International Space Station, and it shows the map, and it's great. We have a whole bunch of different types of activities like this. So my role kind of shifts between the fact that I get to do these hands-on activities with teachers and get immediate feedback from them that they're loving what we're putting out, and then also coordinating kind of from a scientific perspective what we need to do on the space station, how we need to change the experiment in order to make it fit the requirements, safety, upload, and things like that. So.
Excellent. Yeah, that sounds like a really, really fun job and very rewarding too, I imagine.
Incredibly rewarding.
And after you just spent some time talking about how important teachers were to you growing up, to be able to now kind of give back in that way and give them tools to inspire more kids is wonderful. Yeah, I really love that. So what advice would you give somebody, especially a woman who's looking to get into the space industry?
Yeah, I would say that don't be afraid to be naive. Maybe. I think that there's a kind of simple beauty in being naive about some things, and don't become jaded by the fact that things can be hard. You have to continue. You're going to meet a lot of barriers, and that's true in any field. But personally, I've found that there have been a lot of difficulties in entering the space field. And you just need to be creative, and you need to be determined and perseverant.
Yeah.
That's really what you need to do. And if people say no, you say, okay, I'll come back and try again in a year. And you try other routes and you use your network. I think really building a network in this industry is really important. And don't be afraid to introduce yourself. Be truthful about what you're interested in, because sometimes if you are very truthful about what you want to do, someone will say, we don't have a position exactly what we're doing at this company, but actually I have a friend over here who is doing something more similar to what you're saying that you like. Maybe you would be interested in this. So often the positions you think that you're going for immediately maybe aren't even the right ones for you in the first place. And so if you build that network and you communicate, you're able to be kind of placed into the right positions that are often much more suited to your abilities and your interests than you even interpreted in the first place.
Excellent. So have you had any challenges as a woman in the space industry, or in any of your kind of science degrees? Has being a woman, do you think, helped or hindered you in any way?
I think, certainly, of course, being a woman and a young woman in aerospace has been a bit challenging, and in, science degrees. Luckily, during my my schooling, it was a little bit more balanced. There were mostly female and male students in my classes, so it didn't feel quite so imbalanced. Once I entered the space field in a more professional manner, I will say it is noticeable that there's a difference in the amount of people for male and female. But I try not to let that be discouraging or intimidating. I think that at first it can be a little bit intimidating when you're first entering it, but if you just continue, keep pushing and work hard, you'll believe in your own abilities, and then it doesn't matter. Really, it's that's not to say that there are not certainly other challenges with that. There's always sometimes some perceptions, and I think you just need to do your work, and you do your job, and people, no matter what they might think at the very beginning, ultimately you do your job and you do your job well. It doesn't matter.
Good. I think that's a great message. So what are your long-term career goals? Where do you see yourself in 10 years, 20 years? Where do you go from here? What's next?
That's a hard question. Realistically, I think, and truthfully, I'm not where I thought I would be 5 years ago at all.
Right.
So I honestly don't know where I will be in 5 years or 20 years. I think sometimes more and more, I think as I continue to work in education and STEM literacy, that perhaps at some point I will be frustrated by the fact of how much reach and how much impact I can have, and that perhaps the next step would then be going into politics, for example, something where you can enact a little bit bigger of a change. But then also on the other side, that scares me.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to continue to pursue different interests that I have and passions within different facets of the position that I'm currently in. And of course, keeping in mind that ultimate goal that I would like to enact bigger change and more long-lasting impact, that things that lead me into that direction, I think, are where I'm going to continue to pursue.
Excellent. I love that. So I find that most people who are in the space industry, we really love it, right? We're true believers. It kind of takes over your whole life,
yes,
right? Yeah. So do you have anything that you do outside of work? Do you have any nonprofit activities or volunteer work that you do that's kind of helping move humanity out into space? Anything like that?
So actually, I mean, it is completely unrelated to space. Of course, I have some funding activities where I help to give back to some of the institutions that helped give me opportunity from an education perspective. But other than that, I continue to dance, as I said before. Yeah. And something I haven't been able to do as easily now that I moved to another country, but in the past, I always did volunteer work at hospitals. So all throughout my youth, I would specifically volunteer on geriatric units, and it's something that I miss very much. But of course, living now in a country where English isn't the first language, I have a hard time speaking with elderly people. But I think actually this is a huge impact on my life. Working with geriatric patients when I was young was hugely impactful. I encourage every young person to go and spend time with an older person, because the stuff that you can learn and the fact that they lose all filter at this point is
they just tell you how it is.
They tell you how it is. They tell you what they think. They tell you their regrets. They tell you their successes and accomplishments. And it's I think it's a real learning experience for anyone to do. So I hopefully would like to get back into that maybe when my Dutch becomes better.
And so you mentioned Dutch, so you're living in the Netherlands. How was that? Was it a fun transition from Canada to the Netherlands? And how do you like that environment?
Yeah, it's been a huge transition, mostly the weather, I have to say. I'm sorry if there's any Dutch listeners, but the weather is very sad. It rains a lot. No, but it's a beautiful country. I've really enjoyed my transition and living in Europe. I intended to go for 1 year, and I ended up now, this is my 5th year living there. So much to my parents' dismay.
But you obviously are enjoying it if you're still there. Yeah,
yes, absolutely. It's a great place to live. Yeah, it's wonderful.
What's your vision for humanity's future in space? What do you think is coming next?
This, I think, has 2 parts to it. One, of course, I feel strongly, and I'm inspired, I think, and everyone is, towards this direction of exploration. Where do we go from here? How can we live and work on another planet? On the other hand of that, I think that space has a huge capacity and perhaps a moral obligation to utilize space for Earth. I think that we have the capacity to do that in this time, that we should focus just as much on exploring beyond as taking care of the planet that we currently have. And for that reason, selfishly, I hope that we do go on to explore and, maybe inhabit new worlds. I am very excited for the plans of going back to the moon. I think that that's going to be a really incredible, experience for everyone as a part of this generation. And I hope that we are able to learn from that exploration about how to better take care of our own planet. So, if we go to the moon and we make giant strides in situ resource utilization, why not be able to take back those scientific and engineering technologies to Earth and change the way that we do things here as well? So while I want to explore further, I also want to ensure that we don't go or become too starry-eyed, I guess, with the idea of just abandon where we've come from and go out and create more. I think we have a duty as creatures of this planet to also take care of what we've created here.
Perfect. And when it comes time to actually settle space, will you be among the first to go?
I'm afraid of flying on planes. So I don't even know. No,
how'd you get all the way to Europe if you're afraid of planes?
Yeah, no, I would love to. Yeah, I think that would be, of course, hugely exciting.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'll be right there with you. I'll hold your hand so you won't be so scared. All right, Alana. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It was a real pleasure to learn more about you and to hear your story. And
thank you very much for having me.
I love the work that you're doing, so keep it up.
Thanks so much.
Mission Eve is a production of the Center for Space, Commerce, and Finance, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to educating entrepreneurs and investors about their respective challenges and opportunities as it relates to space. Megan Crawford has been your host and executive producer. Aaron Pagel is the executive director for the center and producer and editor for this episode. Marketing and communications for Mission Eve is managed by Nikki Martinez. Theme music has been composed by Liz Fole. If you'd like to support this podcast, please visit patreon.com/missioneve to become a monthly subscriber. We have multiple tiers available with benefits like personalized thank yous, access to limited edition t-shirts, opportunities to engage with our interviewees via online Ask Me Anything sessions, and small group gatherings with Megan Crawford when available. Any support you can offer will go a long way to helping us continue to tell the stories of the women who are making life in space a reality. Please follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Center for Space Commerce and Finance, Twitter at CSCF_nonprofit, and LinkedIn at linkedin.com/company/CSCF. Thank you very much for listening.